Okay, let's get started. Welcome again, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar, How Headless CMS and GraphQL APIs Help Diversify Content Delivery. Both Headless and GraphQL have been trending in the content management world for a while now, but they're more than just buzzwords. They've become necessary layers to a modern tech stack. I got this question the other day. Can you give me any advice on a headless CMS solution? I've been searching for a few days and all the information is extremely overwhelming. And it absolutely can be. Headless architecture is not an express path to success, and it's important to understand how headless can make a real impact on your organization and learn the different API structures that can power your headless solution. So today we're going to talk about just that, and specifically how GraphQL can give you a big advantage in content and digital experience delivery. My name is Jenny Silvers. I'm our digital marketing and virtual events manager here at Brightspot. And before we get started, I want to run through some logistics and introductions. First, let me introduce you to Brightspot and tell you a little bit about our company. Brightspot's a product company with deep experience in publishing and media. At Brightspot, we believe technology should enable content-focused teams to work smarter, faster, and more seamlessly to move businesses forward. Our content business platform helps companies transform their business content and digital experiences by creating enterprise applications at scale with astonishing speed. Our work focuses on many market segments and their specific use cases, from media and entertainment to e-commerce to sports, nonprofits, and more. The use cases range from creating excellent digital experiences for media organizations like LA Times and Politico, improving brand storytelling and corporate news sites for large global brands like Walmart and Johnson & Johnson, to working with nonprofits and educational institutions to improve their online presence and enhance their business processes and workflows. So let's get rolling with the agenda today. Throughout the webinar, you can ask us any questions using the question box in the right-hand panel. We'll have a Q&A session at the end, and I'll be monitoring that question box for any sort of logistical questions that you may have. I want to remind everyone that we'll be sharing the recording of the webinar with you all after the event. So keep an eye on your inbox for that. And of course, you can share it with any colleagues who might find it helpful. So in just a second, we're going to go into a little introduction of Amavi. And then we're going to explore traditional, decoupled, headless, and hybrid CMS architecture, go into a little bit about the benefits of headless, and then some advantages of using GraphQL. And then we're going to dive into how specifically Brightspot uses GraphQL. Then we'll have a little Q&A section. So please make sure to ask us any questions that you have. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Amavi Walker. He's a senior software engineer here at Brightspot. He's been here for more than 4 years, so I know he has a really wonderful, insightful presentation for you all today. With that, I will let Amavi take it away.
Thank you for the introduction, Jenny, and hello, everyone. I'm Amavi Walker, and I work on the platform team. I am the subject matter expert and primary developer for Brightspot's GraphQL implementation. My main focus is on contributing to our GraphQL plugin and supporting its use by the rest of our organization, as well as our clients. So let's jump into our presentation. First, we will be discussing different options for CMS architecture. There are 3 main architectures employed by CMSs: traditional, decoupled, and headless. In the following slides, we'll dive deeper into each type of architecture. And don't worry, the graphics that you see here will also be included, so you get to see them again. A traditional CMS manages your entire web application end-to-end and usually dictates the technologies used throughout, from the creation and storage of content to the presentation of that content on a website. There's very little technical flexibility in this approach, as the data and presentation layers are tightly coupled, with very little technical freedom, as you are required to use the technologies of the CMS. And moving off such a system usually requires rebuilding all parts of your application from scratch. A decoupled CMS does significantly better in this regard. Most importantly, there's a clear separation between the data and presentation system. A good implementation will allow parallel development of the front end and back end, making it easier to update and maintain, as well as improve code reuse and flexibility. However, in this model, there are generally still some technology restrictions on how both your backend and front end are built. A headless CMS takes the decoupled approach one step further by removing the presentation system altogether and instead just delivers data, usually via JSON. A headless CMS still has an editorial interface, but no end user interface, so it is backend only. In this model, you have complete front-end freedom. You can use whatever front-end technologies you'd like, and if you decide to migrate to a different headless CMS later on, you don't have to rewrite your entire front-end. So what are the benefits of going headless for your business? With headless, business has the opportunity to take advantage of an API-first approach. With an API-first approach, the API is the foundation for all application, which enables significant front-end freedom. This front-end freedom has additional benefits such as avoiding vendor lock-in, since existing data can be easily used with a new tool. Furthermore, if a new device or front-end technology comes along, existing APIs can be called without the need for new back-end work. All of this allows for extremely fast content delivery, as the same content can be used to power a plethora of experiences. Many developers also prefer a headless approach because it permits them to leverage their preferred frameworks and tools, in addition to having more options for creative solutions. So what are some more benefits of going headless for developers? Headless architecture increases the ability for backend and front-end developers to work in parallel, since their work is only connected via simple APIs. Developers are empowered to rapidly integrate new designs due to the ability of leveraging existing data or implementing designs using mock data, while backend developers make any necessary API extensions in parallel. Safe and secure APIs can be created for third parties that need access to content data. And if a new third party comes along with the same data needs, they can leverage existing APIs. So the strict separation between backend and front-end code makes code on both sides easier to maintain and reuse. What is GraphQL? GraphQL is a query language for APIs and a runtime for fulfilling those queries with your existing data. It's an alternative to the traditional RESTful style of web services, which at best have very loose guidelines for how an API should be structured. GraphQL strictly defines the language of how the client and the server communicate, irrespective of your specific data models. It was originally created at Facebook in 2012, and then the development of the public GraphQL specification began in 2015 and has become an open standard. In the following slides, we'll cover the main advantages of using GraphQL. Ask for what you need and get exactly that. In the context of Brightspot, this functionality is useful for content types such as articles that contain numerous input fields. If one app needs 2 fields while another needs 10, you don't need multiple API endpoints, and the app that only needs 2 only gets 2. Get many resources in a single request. Brightspot's ecosystem is comprised of many content types with complex but useful relationships. While typical REST APIs require loading data from multiple URLs to gather all data when dealing with complex data relationships, GraphQL APIs get all of the data that your app needs in a single request. Describe what's possible with a type system. This is one of the most important aspects of GraphQL in terms of why it was such a good fit for Brightspot. They both have a self-describing type system, so clients can easily discover what data types and fields are accessible from the API. In Brightspot, if a new field is added to a content type, the editorial user interface for that type also updates so that the new field can be published by an editor. Our GraphQL implementation takes this functionality one step further by ensuring that the GraphQL schema and user interface stay in sync. In other words, if a new field is added to a content type, it will automatically be reflected in the GraphQL schema that we generate. Later on, I'll show you exactly what I mean. Move faster with powerful developer tools. There are a myriad of developer tools for writing and sending GraphQL queries. Because of the self-describing type system, you also benefit from features like autocomplete. You can see here that we've actually embedded a pre-existing developer tool called GraphQL directly into Brightspot. Evolve your API without versions. You can add new fields and deprecate old ones without impacting existing queries. Brightspot translates deprecated data model types and fields directly into deprecated versions of their GraphQL counterparts. This gives apps continuous access to new features from the platform. Bring your own data and code. When deciding to use GraphQL, because it's just a specification for how an API should work, there's no limitation on the client or server languages that are used to implement it. And there are already several libraries written in a variety of languages to help get you started. This feature enabled us to elegantly express our existing Brightspot type and view systems as GraphQL schemas. Before we dive further into how Brightspot leverages GraphQL, it's important to understand the basics of Brightspot development. Take a look at the example of the author class on this slide, and next to it, you'll see an example of the editorial interface that is automatically generated based on its fields. Developers don't need to worry about managing a database or creating a UI. Brightspot handles that for them so that they can focus on modeling their data and rapidly iterating. I want to point out that Brightspot leverages an in-house tool called Dari. Dari is Brightspot's underlying data framework that handles communication to any databases. But to keep things simple, we'll refer to all of our tools as Brightspot. Data modeling is at the core of Brightspot's development framework, but it's important to be aware of view models, which are also a key component. View models allow an organization to apply additional business logic to a data model in order to add, remove, or manipulate its data before it's presented to the user. Take a look at the author view model Java code on the right. We are passing the biography data from the model directly through without any additional logic because we've determined that it's fine as is. However, things get interesting for the location data. Consider that we are surfacing this information on some type of app or website. We may not want to actually display the author's full address for privacy reasons. So we're manipulating the address to pull out the state information and only surface their state. Additionally, we're querying for all of the author's works, data that was not present on the model but is pointing to it. On the left, we have an example of one of Brightspot's developer tools that allows us to view a visual representation of our data structures. Notice how all of the methods from our view model are also represented in the schema viewer. Now, let's get back to talking about GraphQL. Brightspot offers two types of configurable GraphQL APIs. They are the content management and content delivery APIs, commonly abbreviated as CMA and CDA respectively. With some very light configuration, GraphQL schemas and APIs are automatically generated and updated with each change to relevant data models and business logic. The Java code on this slide shows some simple examples of how create, read, update, and delete, commonly abbreviated as CRUD, operations are typically performed in Brightspot. The Content Management API exposes the ability to perform CRUD operations directly on Brightspot data models via GraphQL queries. This tool would be useful for creating something like an iOS widget for editors in your organization to accomplish quick, simple tasks without logging into the main Brightspot interface. The JSON example on this slide shows output from the view model that we've introduced a few slides back. Remember that we removed some of the author's address for their privacy and queried for their published work so that we could return that data as well. The Content Delivery API enables us to utilize GraphQL queries in order to fetch this process data from view models. It can also be used to perform CRUD operations, but the ability to specify business logic makes it useful for building APIs safe for consumption by third parties. This tool is useful for delivering data to front-end experiences for end users of your content, whether that be a website, native mobile application, or some other experience. What sets Brightspot apart? Brightspot is built on an extensible architecture that offers ultimate flexibility to choose headless, decoupled, or hybrid headless CMS as your approach. And hybrid headless just meaning that we can actually leverage both the benefits of decoupled and headless at the same time. So now that you've seen a bit of what Brightspot can do, let's get started with the demo so that I can show you some of what we've gone over today. So I just want to start off, jumping back into that code that we saw in some of the previous slides. And just to reiterate, this author has a few fields, first name, last name, and biography, that are all just string types. And then we have this address field, which is just modeled like a normal United States address, address line 1 and 2, city, state, and zip code. We also have this third type that wasn't in the presentation that is just representing any published works that an author might have. And it's just listing the title of the work and a URL that maybe points to a page with more information about the work. And also we have a field for the author so that this work can point to its authors. We know who published it, and that's indexed. And this indexed annotation adds a few features that we can utilize in Brightspot, and I'll show you once we get into the UI. So let's go over to the UI, and this is what an editor is typically going to see when they log into Brightspot. So I'd like to jump into one of these authors that is already published, and you can see here that all of the fields that were modeled in that Java class that we were just looking at automatically generated this UI. And if we were to, change any of these fields and save, it's automatically saved to the database. One less thing that a developer has to worry about. And let's also look at the work type. So this is Brightspot's global search. You can see that we're surfacing the author over here, and you can actually even filter down by the author because of that indexed annotation that we discussed. If we just go and look at a work, once again, you can see that the UI represents that class that we were just looking at. And so then I'd like to also show you one of the schema viewing tools that comes with Brightspot, and we can just add author and work. And once again, this is just a great way for developers, when things get super complex, these data relationships, to be able to come into this interface and see the relationship between all of these data structures. So now that we've seen a little bit of normal Brightspot, let's go into our API section of the CMS and configure content management API. So I'm just going to create a new one. And so I just set a name. It automatically generated a path, which we could also, of course, change. And for the read types, I'm going to select author and work. Also, I want to point out that on the side, you'll see that there's read types over here. That's what we would use to actually configure GraphQL mutation APIs. But for this demo, we're not going to be using that. And one more thing I'd like to point out is that there are a couple more settings in here that we won't be utilizing for this demo. But another setting that you will see when we move to the CDA portion of this demo is that you can actually set an API client key. When it comes to the management API, we actually by default always require that, so there's no configuration option because once again, this is more of a direct control of data in the CMS, so it's not something that we necessarily want to just expose for the entire world to use. So now that we've configured that, let's go back over to the GraphQL section of the CMS. And here's the CMA that we just configured. You can see that these two APIs, work and author, were automatically generated. And so if we just dive into author, this is the typical structure that you're going to see with all record queries in the CMA. So you can see that work and author are exactly the same. And that's because we want to give the user the ability to specify an ID to fetch a specific record. If they don't specify an ID, we have a limit and offset so that for the results that are returned, we can limit the amount that are returned or also specify an offset in the result set so that we can use pagination to iterate through results. And then there's predicate for more fine grain control of the results that we retrieve, as well as sorts. And then we're going to have this items field, and items just represents instances of an author in this context, or instances of whatever content that we are querying for. And hopefully we recognize these fields here. These are the same fields that were in that Java model. So we're going to select first name, last name, biography, and then in address, we're going to select one, city, state, and zip code. There's another field down here that all of these CMA queries have, just to once again provide some pagination info. And if you're dealing with a giant result set, this is very useful. So we can determine the count and if there's any more items to paginate through. And also, I'm sorry, let me zoom in a bit. Cool. I'm gonna exit out of this docs viewer and run this query. So notice that, well, first the GraphQL has this term shape, and shape just is pointing out that we query for fields in a certain order, and the same shape, so the order and structure of the fields is returned by the result set, so that developers on the receiving end know exactly what to expect. And so here we have some information that we queried for, and including the page info. Okay, so now that we've showed a little bit of seeing the author UI and then also querying for it via the CMA, I did mention before that we can actually add fields to models and kind of work with these rapidly changing models live. So I would like to add a field to author. And in this example, like consider that we had a case where some third party was using the content management API to ingest author records. That service might have author ID. And it would be a unique identifier for authors in their system. So let's add an author ID field. And just go ahead and refresh. And this reloading screen is a tool in Brightspot that is really useful for developers. It allows us to make changes and not have to go through an entire build process every time. So it can save a good amount of time overall. And right now the schema is just reloading. And you see now this new author ID is also a field we can query on. And just to confirm that the UI has also updated, we can go here and we see this author ID. So I hope that gives you a good understanding of normal modeling and publishing in Brightspot, as well as using the CMA. I'd like to go back into to dive into the CDA now, the Content Delivery API. And first, I'd like to show you some view models because those are the types of classes that these APIs are generated off of. I'm just going to open up a few view models. And here's that author view model that we saw during the presentation. Once again, it's a view model for an author type. And so for the biography, we're just passing that information straight through. For the location, we're filtering down so that we only pass the state. For name, maybe our organization has determined that we don't want to supply first and last name separate, because if anybody's using our author data, they should be using the first and last name together. So there's just a name field that returns the first and last name concatenated. And then we have this works field that queries for author works and returns work view models. And work view models are just simple view models that are passing the data from the work model straight through. And then lastly, we have this author search view model. These two fields up here will become GraphQL arguments for our field, for our author search field that this view model will surface. And the search will be used to, we'll show a little bit later that the search can be used to filter down on author results a bit more. So let's head back into Brightspot and go to the API section, because now we're going to configure a GraphQL delivery API. And name this author delivery. And once again, we do have query entry view classes and mutation entry view classes. This is just since you can do CRUD operations in view models, it may make sense to actually specify certain view models as being mutation view models. But for now, we're just going to focus on query. And so, and then also I'd like to point out, remember I mentioned that the content management API enforces an API key, but we could easily open up this API to the rest of the world if we wanted to. So I'm going to select search and author search, save this, head back over to the GraphQL section. And now there is a content delivery API. And you can see the author view model once again matches the author field once again matches the author view model that we created. And here you can query by ID, or if the author has a URL by path, and grab all of that information. And later on, I'll be showing you actually a little front end that we threw together to show use of this data. But before we get there, I'd like to show that author search model. So remember, we had two fields, search and limit, and now they're surfaced as arguments for this author search view model. And we just go down here, select a few of the options. Now we can query and get some results of the authors that are in the system. If we want to limit to one, we can make sure that only one item is returned. We can also search. So we see that Percy lives in Calisota. So we can search for Calisota, or we can search by Jen's name and get her result. And so we're just searching through all the data on these authors and returning them. And this was a very simple view model that allowed us to expose a pretty powerful API. And then also, I'd like to go over and just show you the Docs Explorer. So this is, once again, one of the open source tools that we are leveraging through Brightspot, or within Brightspot, to provide a little bit more functionality so that we can actually dive down into the query top level field, query type, and look at the top level fields. Let's see what an author is constructed of. You'll notice that we have the object type that is in the schema for the author that represents the author view model, and also these descriptions on each of the fields. And I'm not sure if you noticed, but in the author view model, we had some Java docs that were on these fields giving a little bit more information. Like, once again, the location might be kind of ambiguous to the caller, but this note tells, hey, it returns the author's state for privacy purposes. That's why we're not, giving you the whole address. And this nice note is here as well. And just like we have the database viewer that we looked at for the models, there's also a schema viewer for our view system. And so here we can select author, author search, and actually see in the same way the relationships between the data structures generated from view models, which is, once again, can be very useful when these systems get super complex, and a developer just wants to go and see what it looks like at a high level, and of course visual representations help a lot of the time. Okay, and so the last thing I'd like to show is just what an app might look like utilizing all of these services. And I'm going to do that through showing you preview first. And remember, when we went over traditional and decoupled CMSs, a benefit of them is that since everything is controlled by the CMS itself, things like preview, features like preview work pretty automatically. With Headless, the CMS isn't actually delivering the front end experience. So it gets a little bit more complicated. We have to figure out how to show a preview of something that we aren't controlling. So let's just go over into our site settings and see how we configure that. We scroll to the bottom, you can see we have this GraphQL preview React app. Notice that this preview URL is localhost 3000, and my CMS is being delivered from localhost. So they are effectively two different URLs. So that's all the configuration needed to set up our React app. So now let's go over to Jen and look at, let me zoom in a little bit. Okay. So this is a preview of a React app that is running outside of the CMS. And this can be very useful so that editors can see stuff update live. And over here, so you see that this is updated, and we actually have this React app over here. Of course, it is not updating live with our changes because we haven't actually published anything yet. So if we go ahead and publish, then we can see that our changes, it's now Jill tiled, and the biography is a bit longer. So in the interest of keeping this demo concise, that's all I'll be showing today. If you would like to see more, feel free to contact us for your own demo. And I just have a few more slides to really tie this all together. So headless APIs are only part of the story. A rich content editing experience is also a crucial aspect of a great headless CMS, and Brightspot Ready-Made provides a great starting point for any business. Brightspot's unique data framework approach tees users up for rapid iteration with out-of-the-box components and content models that are relevant to more than 25 use cases. So users can quickly transform and adopt new components for their program. These adaptable and extendable pre-built components and out-of-the-box integrations allow businesses to get off of the ground quickly with efficiently creating, managing, and publishing content. As you can see, Brightspot Ready-Made includes enterprise-level CMS solutions and many content types out of the box. Some of our features include multi-site, multi-language, users and roles, custom workflows and dashboards, content analytics, tag auto suggestions and management, rich text editing, live preview, notifications, scheduled publishing, version control, site search, image editing, cropping and auto tagging, audio and video transcription, SEO tools, auto-generated sitemaps, and content translation. Those are just a subset of Brightspot's features, and the list is growing every day. As always, all of our features are customizable so that they can be tailored to fit any organization's specific needs. We offer an integration-ready and migration-friendly architecture in which headless implementations can leverage these existing features and content types to allow a business to start publishing and exposing data extremely fast. So let's take a look at some of these experiences to highlight how visually appealing and user-friendly they are. Default and custom dashboards allow a user to have most of their handy tools welcome them once they log into Brightspot, as you saw a little bit earlier. In our default dashboard, they can quickly start creating new content, bulk upload new files, and view their organization's recent activity as well as scheduled events. Brightspot supports multi-site capabilities, allowing users to switch sites on any page by navigating to their header and clicking the site switcher. Users and roles allow an organization to configure fine-grained permissions so that users only have access to the resources that are necessary for their role. Workflows allow an organization to define specific paths with concrete steps that content must flow through in order to be published. This is very useful when content must be reviewed and approved by different entities. Brightspot has page content type configuration options specifically added for SEO. Custom-built themes or headless implementations can take advantage of the SEO data that editors provide. Brightspot offers the option to start with a customizable pre-built theme. Here are a few variations of our Falcon theme. Our themes leverage editorially defined SEO data out of the box and are built to comply with industry standard SEO best practices, including features like extensive use of JSON LD schema.org structured data in our templates. As mentioned before, an organization has the option to utilize one of these themes and our out-of-the-box content types to launch a web experience that's also backed by a hybrid headless CMS, complete with automatically generated GraphQL APIs, incredibly fast. That concludes our presentation. Are there any questions?
Awesome, thanks so much, Amavi. And we actually do have a question from the audience. So going back to your demo a little bit, Doug was asking, can fields be references to other systems via API? I don't want to duplicate data in Brightspot that's available via API from another system, but I want to make associations to that data and specific parts of a record from within Brightspot.
So if we don't want to duplicate data within Brightspot, we would simply leverage our view system to make those API calls on the fly to gain that information. If we didn't want to make those API calls, then we probably would have to ingest that data.
Okay, hopefully that answered your question. We do have another question here from Victor. He asked, how is the integration of SEO with GraphQL?
Can he provide a little bit more information around that question? I'm not completely sure what he's asking.
Yeah, Victor, let us know if you have a little bit more context to that question. And then we do have another question from Tim. What is the recommended algorithm for pulling data via GraphQL for composite objects like sections, which have variable content in the main section?
So GraphQL, actually, that's not a specific to Brightspot question. That's just how GraphQL, a problem that GraphQL has solved. So when we have sections and there's all these different content types, GraphQL has this concept of an interface or union. Interfaces, they're both abstract types, so it's just saying, hey, say we have a module and all modules have titles, then we'd have an interface. That is module and any type of thing that was a module we know has a title. But say module doesn't have a field, then we would just have unions because unions don't actually have any fields associated with them. But what's interesting is that when we model anything as an interface or a union, we actually have a spread operator is what they call it in GraphQL, and it's just dot dot on. So we could say dot dot on this type of module, dot dot on that type of module, and kind of enumerate all the options. And then within those options, we can actually pull specific information out so that your APIs, your API calls are kind of ready for whatever the system has to throw at it.
Okay, awesome. If anyone has any other questions, let us know. If not, Victor, on your SEO question, we'll be in touch separately. If you wanted to provide a little bit more context there, we can be in touch to have a more personal conversation on that. But if anyone does have more questions, you can always get in touch with us either at demo@brightspot.com or marketing@brightspot.com. But with that, that concludes our presentation today. Thank you so much to Amavi. Thank you to all of you for joining us and taking the time out of your day to learn a little bit about Headless, GraphQL, and Brightspot. So I hope to see you on some future webinars and have a great day.
Thanks, Jenny. Thanks, everyone.